Hey guys, welcome back. We are on the final part of our 4-part series that follows this video and seeks to give you guys some more subject-specific A-level advice. Today we're going to be finishing off with the EPQ. I took the AQA exam board EPQ in the summer of 2023 and I achieved an A star. I got 48 out of 50 for my essay titled Which of the Prime Conjectures is the Most Significant? And so I've rounded up 10 tips for those of you who've chosen to do the essay rather than the artifact part of the EPQ. I'm going to check if I'm allowed to upload my actual essay. I know I can't show you guys the production log, but if I'm allowed to upload my actual 5,000 words, I will. They'll be in the description, just so you guys can have a look what a final piece kind of looks like. But other than that, let's get right into it. My first tip is don't try and be interesting. Right at the beginning of the project, your supervisor will probably give you a list of topics that would be a good idea to explore. And these are normally quite philosophical questions, like should euthanasia be legalised or does money buy happiness? And while these are definitely interesting questions, I think as a general principle you should stay away from the suggested sheet and just pick the topic that you think is going to be easiest for you to write about. At the end of the day, the EPQ is supposed to be a minimum 120 hours work. For me personally, it took a lot longer than that, and if you don't really care about euthanasia, that's a really long time to be writing about and researching it. I would also say that while there's no requirement for being unique and you shouldn't worry about trying to be unique, if you pick a topic that's a little bit more cliche and then you go online while you're researching, you're going to be able to find loads of other essays with the same title as yours. And then once you've read those, it's going to be really hard for you to avoid plagiarism, not because I think you're a cheater, just because once you've sort of absorbed that information, it's going to be really hard for you to shake the narrative, and that's sort of like an issue that you don't really want to be dealing with. My second tip is to keep your title simple. Right when you're starting out the project, 5,000 words is going to seem like a lot, but when you're nearing the end, you'll realise that it really isn't, and the 120 hours of EPQ work comes almost all from the documentation. It takes a very small fraction of that time to actually write the essay itself, because the essay isn't very long. And so I think the best port of call is to keep your title as simple as possible, then write out your essay, and if you happen to end up in a situation when you're a little bit short on the word count, then go back and start to add complexities in. It's much easier that way around. The A-star grade descriptor requires problems to be fully explored, and so you need to be realistic with how many problems you can actually look at. For me, 5,000 words was only 3 prime conjectures, so you actually can waffle quite a lot when you need to. My third tip is that your references matter. At the end of the essay, you're going to have a bibliography, which is a table full of all of your references. And if you want to be hitting those AO2 marks for relevant resources, as well as having standard Harvard referencing, title, date accessed, author, blah, blah, you're also going to need a column in which you evaluate the reliability of the resource. And so essentially, for every resource you look at, you need to write a small paragraph about who wrote it or what kind of resource it is, and you need to evaluate that. Now, my EPQ had 70 references in it, and so I had to write 70 of those paragraphs, and that takes a really, really long time. And so your bibliography shouldn't be discarded because these are really important AO2 marks. You need to leave a good chunk of time. Don't just leave it till the end, 30 minutes before submission deadline, and then try and shove the references in. It's not going to work. Also, if you want to bag all of the AO2 marks, you need to use a range of resources, and so it might be worth having a column in your bibliography where you point out the type of source just to show that they are different. And these don't have to be crazy, you know, a book is different to a research paper, which is different to a blog. Just these little things can help really bag yourself the extra marks. I also think it's a great idea that you actually do the bibliography while you're researching rather than after writing the essay. Not because it takes so much time to go back and look at it, but because if you forget a reference, that's plagiarism, and there are some really hard consequences for that, and so you want to take every precautionary measure. My fourth tip is that deadlines are important. Now, the EPQ is one project with one final deadline, but it's likely that your centre will set a series of internal deadlines to make sure that you're on track. And it's really important that you do stick to these deadlines. Firstly, because one of the big marking points, AO1, is manage. And by not adhering to deadlines, you're showing that you don't know how to manage your time. Also, if there's a deadline set for submitting different drafts or your final essay, you need to stick to them, because if everyone submits them late, your supervisor isn't going to have enough time to mark all of the essays before the harsh exam board deadline. And if they do have enough time, you're going to get your project marked really harshly because you've left it to the last minute, and it's not worth the risk. For this reason, I think it's important that at the beginning of your project, when they ask you to write out a plan or a schedule, you do actually take the time to think about mock periods or holidays or when you're going to want to work on your EPQ more, and you're really strict with yourself in sticking to the plan because it is really, really easy to fall behind. My fifth tip is to stick to the word count. The essay is 5,000 words because they want you to write 5,000 words, and I see people online writing 10 or 12,000 words, and that's completely unnecessary. If you're getting to that kind of length, you're either not very good at being concise or you've picked far too complex of an essay title, and in both cases you're completely wasting your time. You can get all of the marks in 5,000 words, and that is what they want you to do. And so before starting, when you're doing your plan, I would map out the structure of your essay, typically intro, conclusion, and then 2 or 3 paragraphs in the middle is typical. That's what I did. And then to each paragraph, you write what you're going to put in each one, and then you can assign a word count. And not only is that good planning, but it's also helping you save your time by making sure that you're sticking to the number of words that you need. My 6th tip is that the evaluation marks are the easiest to obtain. Now, evaluation is one of the key marking points, it's AO4, and it can be easy to neglect because it's right at the end of your project when you're probably fed up and running out of time, but it is still worth 20% of your final grade. Now, the good news is that I think this section is by far the easiest to fill in because you're just talking about the project that you've already done. Now, you want to be looking at your planning, your implementation, your learning, and the outcome. And it's important that when you reflect, you are critical. It can be tempting to tell the examiner that your project was perfect, but in the end, you're going to get more marks when you do reflect truthfully and talk about the things that you think went wrong. I recently saw this video by Life of Lou on their EPQ, and they talked about how in their evaluation section, they also submitted a spreadsheet which had all of the key marking points and then a small explanation on how they thought they'd met all of them. And I wish I'd seen this video when I was doing my EPQ because I think that's an absolutely phenomenal idea as well. My 7th tip is to keep a diary. For me, this was just a separate Google Doc where every time I worked on my EPQ, I noted down the date and then wrote a small paragraph on what I'd done in that session. And this is great for picking up some AO1 and some AO3 marks. For the AO3, every time you change something in your plan or you amend something in your essay or anything like that, you should write down what you did and why, because there are marks awarded for changing and explaining when necessary. You can also get AO1 marks by referencing back to your original plan, because part of AO1 is a detailed plan and you monitor your progress against it, and the diary is by far the easiest place to demonstrate this skill. My 8th tip is to write your introduction last. When you're beginning with your essay, it's hard to know where to start, especially if you're someone like me that had only ever really done STEM and didn't know how to write an essay. And I found it easiest to just get right in there and just start writing about the paragraph that I thought I knew the most about. Now, obviously it's not going to be perfect and you're going to need a lot of iterations to get there, but I think that the introduction and the conclusion are the hardest paragraphs, and so you want to leave those till last when you've had the most practice. Also, your introduction is introducing everything you're going to write about in your essay. And while you're writing the actual main bulk of your essay, you're probably going to change what you actually write about because you don't have enough resources for this bit, or you don't have enough word count, or maybe you need something more to talk about. And so it makes sense that you'd write your introduction last, so that you actually know what the essay is about, and then you can introduce it. My 9th tip is that everything should go in your production log. The production log is the only piece of assessed material that isn't limited in terms of how much you can say. Both your essay and your presentation are, and so you're going to pick up the most marks from your production log, not only because there's such a high emphasis on planning and process in the EPQ, but also because you can say the most, and so you want to take advantage of this. There is no thing that's too small to mention in your log. If you've drawn up a Gantt chart and it's gone wrong or it's silly, and then you do another one that's better, put them both in. There is no point in handing in a production log that is a perfected story of what happened, because you're not going to pick up the marks that way. And I think you really need to take advantage of the fact that there is no negative marking, so you shouldn't feel embarrassed to put something in that's sort of trivial, because it might not be, and if it is, nobody's going to care. My 10th and final tip is some advice on your presentation. You'll likely do your presentation at the end of the year after you've already submitted your essay and the majority of your production log. And my biggest piece of advice would be to think of this as an opportunity rather than a test. Now, the likely format will be that you're in front of a small audience, you have some slides next to you, you flick through them and you talk for 5 or so minutes, both on the content of your essay and on your process. Now, the first thing I would say is that if you're tempted to have some cue cards, I would definitely recommend that you learn a script instead. I think it's much more powerful if you just stood there and talking from your own mind, even if you've memorized something. And I think it really hits home on the bullet points of both fluent communication and deep and extensive knowledge of your subject. Now, afterwards, there'll be an opportunity for people to ask you some questions, and your supervisors will ask you questions, and this is where I would advise you not to panic. Now, what likely will have happened is that your supervisors will have looked through your production log, found some things that maybe you're missing or that you didn't explore fully, and they're going to ask you questions based off that. So they might ask you, oh, I noticed in your plan you were supposed to finish your reading in October, but you finished in November. Why is this? And they're not being horrible, they're giving you the opportunity to develop that idea further, and they're helping you pick up the marks that you might have missed. Okay, that's everything I wanted to say to you today. Thank you so much for watching and listening. If you have any requests, let me know. Other than that, very best of luck for your EPQ and A-level journey.